Good morning, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our class on Halacha. We are going to talk about a really important and critical topic tonight, which is Eid Echad Ne'eman Bisurin, who is trustworthy in Kashrut. Now, we have a statement there, which I just said in Hebrew, which is one person can testify about things being permitted or being forbidden. Okay, and we're going to have a look at that right now. I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can see everything which we're going to learn tonight. One sec, here we go. Here we are. So, there is a Gemara in Masechet Gitin, and it says as follows. Emor de Aminan Eid Echad Ne'eman B'Isurin, כגון חתיכה ספק של חלב, ספק של שומן, דלא יתחזק איסורה. The Gemara in Gitin says there, one can say that we say, don't get stuck with that one witness is deemed credible with regard to prohibitions. In a case such as where there is a piece of fat, and we're not sure if it's forbidden fat, which is known as chelev, or if it's permitted fat, which is called shuman. In this scenario, we allow to decide that based on the testimony of a single witness. And that's only in a case delo itchazek isura, where there is no presumption that is forbidden, as in we don't have any other rationale or reason to think otherwise. If we have no reason to think otherwise, then we can go by the testimony of one person. Okay? And Rashi explains, one witness is believed concerning prohibitions. Why? Because the Torah believed each and every Jew about separating terumot and maasrot, and about doing proper shechita, and about removing the gid hanasher, what's known as nikur, which is not allowed to be eaten, and to remove chelev. We have this basic statement that all Jews are believed, are ne'eman, to do those things properly. Okay? And then Rashi continues, it is certainly obvious to us that we rely on one witness as long as one is not suspect. Because if this were not so, there would be no person who could eat the food of his friends, and there would be no one who could rely on his household. One of the things that you may know about me is I don't like what's known in the Ashkenazim world as mindless frumkeit. What do I mean by mindless frumkeit? Mindless frumkeit is an expression which means without thinking about it, it's going to cause a major issue, which is if I'm going to be so strict to say that I'm only going to trust me and I don't trust anyone else, what happens here? You have a fundamental breakdown that no one can eat anywhere. You would be stuck in a situation where I don't trust anyone. And so therefore, if someone says, here's my home-baked cake, and I'm saying, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know if that's kosher, and therefore I can't have it, you're going to be stuck. On the other hand, I don't mean for 1 second that we should be in a situation where when one has a genuine concern that one should eat. All of this is based on the principle that if I have no reason to the contrary, then my fellow brothers and sisters are considered to be shomer Torah or mitzvot, to be God-fearing and observant of mitzvot. However, if I have reason to believe otherwise, then perhaps it's a different question. The Tosafot here in Gitin gives a reason why we have to trust both men and women about what they say is true. And he gives a very important example. A woman is trusted to count her days before she goes to the mikveh. Therefore, there's no one who is checking on her behalf. All of that is her own testimony. As it says there in bold, v'safra la, she counts for herself, says she counts them, What does that mean? Le'atzma. She counts for herself, by herself, meaning that we establish that we trust the woman to say, now I've done my time, now I can go to the mikveh. There is no men involved. There are no other people involved in that process. How does that work fundamentally? It works fundamentally that we believe that the woman is telling the truth, okay? Even so far as to remove her from a state of impurity to a state of purity. Even in that situation, we rely on the woman's testimony to be truthful about herself. We're now going to skip, because some of these sources are rather academic, and if you'd like to read them on your own, but we're going to skip to a more practical scenarios. But I just wanted to establish that we trust the woman and we trust men, we trust them to establish the situation, provided that there's no reason not to. And Shulchan Aruch codifies this in law in source number 8, and it says, Eid echad ne'eman bi'isurim lehatir aval lo lahachmir. A witness is believed concerning matters of prohibitions to permit a food, but not to be stringent and forbid it. The Rama adds, however, some say that for a matter that can be clarified, such as when one person told him, come and I will show you an idolater who uses your wine for idolatry, for yain nesech, one must be concerned with his words, and any item that has not been established to be in a state of prohibition or of permission, one witness is believed about it even to forbid it. And any case where an item has been established as being in a state of prohibition, such as untied produce, what's known as tevel, or a piece of meat that has not had the forbidden portions removed, what's known as menukeret, the witness is not believed to permit it unless it is in his power to rectify it. And if there were two pieces there, one forbidden and one permitted, the witness is believed to say this one is permitted and this one is forbidden, and a person is believed about his own food even when they have been established as being in a state of prohibition. So from here we see that this works. Our position of Eid Echad works very well to establish our beginnings here. And before anyone's going to ask the question, well, what about the scenario of why do we need to have mashgichim? Why aren't people believed in those scenarios? I'm going to address that in classic. First, we're dealing with people making food at home. Then we're going to get into the commercial settings and why mashgichim are required. The Gemara in Beitzah on Yud Daled Amud Bet brings a very interesting scenario about someone who was brought food and wasn't comfortable eating it. So we're going to see the story. It says here, Rav Papi, Ikla Lebei Mar Shmuel. Rav Papi came on a Yom Tov or maybe Chol HaMoed, to the house of Mar Shmuel. Aiti Le Daisa. They brought him some porridge, some oatmeal, Velo Achal, and he did not eat it. So the Gemara wants to know, why didn't he eat it? Dilma b'machteshet ketana avduha. Perhaps they performed the pounding with a small pestle and mortar, and they did it in a way which is permitted to be done on Yom Tov. So why is it that he didn't eat it? So if there is a limud zechut, if I can understand that the person doing it is doing it in a permissible way, why do I need to assume that the person did it in a wrong way? Says the Gemara, Dechazye Dehava Dayak Tfei. No, it couldn't have been done with a small pestle or mortar. Why not? Because it was well ground. So the Gemara asks again, Dilma me'etmol abduha. Why do you have to say that? Perhaps this wasn't done on Yom Tov, and it was ground with that very fine grinding, but it was done before Yom Tov. Again, limud zechut, try to see the person in a positive light. Don't assume that it was done on Yom Tov.
Rabbi?
Yeah?
I have a question. So the issue here is that it was ground on Yom Tov, correct?
The question is when. The question is,
It's when it was ground.
you are brought food, and you're brought something where it looks like it was made that day. How was it done? So if it's really finely ground, there's no way that it could have been done on Yom Tov. So it goes, okay, no problem. It was finely ground, Erev Yom Tov. So they're saying there's still an issue here, and they're going to explain it. Why? You know what the problem is here? Dilma metzmonav dos Gemara. Maybe it was done the day before. No. The chazia the hava kalif tzahare. What's the problem? The husks look really bright, and if they're really bright, it means that it hasn't been oxidized. It means it was done relatively soon, and therefore that's why they were and that's why Rav Papi didn't want to eat it. Says the Gemara, V'i bait ema, or alternatively, Shani Bey Mar Shmuel. What was the problem with the house of Mar Shmuel? Why is that different? The Ika Pritsuta de Avde. Why? Because he has slaves, and his slaves are not careful with prohibitions, or you don't say his slaves, his servants were not careful with mitzvot, and therefore it wasn't Mar Shmuel who did anything wrong, but these servants or these slaves, and they did something wrong. And that was the reason why Rav Papi was uncomfortable eating it. But what do we learn from that Gemara? That what? Had it been Mar Shmuel himself who'd been making the food, then there's no reason for Rav Papi to have had a question about it. He would have been credible, he would have been believed to have done it in a permitted manner, which is, and here's another important rule, which I always tell people, never ever go into someone else's kitchen, especially on Shabbat and Yom Tov. What do I mean by that? If you don't see anything, then you can imagine all manner of possibilities of how that food was made in a permissible manner. You don't want to overly examine someone's kitchen. So sometimes you want to go and help. Oh, I'll go help serve the food. Not necessarily, unless you're a close friend. You don't want to be involved in someone else's kitchen. So you know what? You don't have to look too hard. And the Gemara is basically telling us this, which is give that person a limud zechut. There is no reason, unless, for example, here, there are servants who you know are not careful, then don't believe it. Now, if you have a reason to suggest that someone's not observant, then you probably don't want to eat in their home on Shabbat or Yom Tov. But if you trust them and you know what, those people, they're God-fearing, they keep kosher, they keep Shabbat, that's the scenario where I'm saying you don't want to be overly examining and looking in their kitchen for how they're doing things. The Pitrei Tshuva says this, Ed echad ne'eman b'surim, one person is believed, en tzarich lachkor ech na'aseh behete. You don't need to examine them and say, how did you do this in a permissible matter? Why? Demistama behetera avid, because we assume, our assumption is that they've done it in a permissible way. And that needs to be our footnote, that when we know and we believe that our friends are observant, they don't need to have the nth degree. They don't need to be examined to find out what exactly happened. We trust them. Now, what happens if I know for sure I have someone who is not observant? Can I rely on their kashrut? Now that is a much bigger situation, which we're now going to get into, which is when I know for sure someone is not observant, but they told me it's been made kosher. Can I trust them? So guess what? This is actually not a new question. This is actually a question all the way in the Mishnah 2,000 years ago. And the Mishnah says as follows, HaMekaber alav lihiyot ne'eman. If a man has taken upon himself to be trustworthy, what does that mean regarding taking tithes, that he does things properly so that they should not be considered demai, something which we're uncertain whether the tithes were taken from it? Eino mitareach etzel ha'am haaretz. He is not allowed to be a guest of someone who is an am haaretz. An am haaretz literally means a people of the land, but it means someone who's unlearned or someone who's unscrupulous, who's not particular in these laws, specifically laws of making sure that Trumot and Maasrot, that the tithes are taken properly to make it fit. That's what the Tanna Kama says. Rabbi Yehuda says, Af hamitarech etzel ha'am haaretz ne'eman. He is believed even if he's still, a man who is a guest of Am Haaretz may still be considered a trustworthy. Says the Gemara back to him, or the Tanaim back to Rabbi Yehuda. Amrula al atzmo eno ne'eman, ketzad yehe ne'eman al shel acherim. If he is not trustworthy regarding himself, that what? He ate food which was suspect, how can he be considered trustworthy regarding others? If someone is going to put themselves in harm's way, and we're going to say, I don't think that person's trustworthy. Why? Because they're eating food which is of a questionable source. And before you're getting worried here, you should understand, eating food which has not had trumot and ma'asrot, not had its tithes taken from it, is a more severe punishment than eating chazir, than eating pig or eating meat and milk. Those are considered a lav, something you're not allowed to do. Eating something which is trumot and ma'asrot, which hasn't had its trumot and ma'asrot taken, something which is called tevel, that is a much more severe punishment. I remember when I learned that when I was 18 in yeshiva, it shocked me. How could there be a bigger punishment for not eating fruits and vegetables than if you're eating non-kosher? However, that's true. Our rabbis tell us it's a far more severe to eat that. So the Mishnah is telling us here, if someone were to eat in a home of someone who's not careful, not only are they doing something which is strange and not recommended, but they're bringing into question their own ne'emanut, their own trustworthiness. Harambam, Maimonides, has the same ruling, and he says that someone who's not careful about these halachot is not believed concerning any testimony he gives. So he says here in the bold, V'im huchzak she'eno kasher, v'lo medakdek b'devarim elu, asur lit'areach etzlo. V'im ava v'nit'areach etzlo, eno ochel basar v'lo shoteh yain al piv, ad she'ya'id lo adam kasher alehem. But if the homeowner is established as not being upright, i.e. reliable here, it's playing as a play on words, it is not particular with these matters, it is forbidden to stay with him. And if he went and did stay with him, he may not eat meat nor drink wine based on his words that the food is kosher, unless another upright person, another reliable person testifies about them that they are indeed fine. The Shulchan Aruch says, based on the Rambam, Hachashud le'echol devarim asurim, one who is suspected of eating forbidden foods, bein im hu chashud be'isod Torah, bein im hu chashud be'isod Rabbanan, whether it is a Torah prohibition or a rabbinic prohibition, en nismach alav bahem, one cannot rely on them. Ve'im nit'areach imo, and if he stayed with him, lo ye'achel mishelo medavrim shu chashud alehem. He may not eat from his food from items that he is suspected about. The Shach notes that the word chashud used in Shulchan Aruch seems to indicate that according to the Shulchan Aruch, one is not believed only if there is good reason that he is suspected of not keeping kosher. But according to the Shulchan Aruch, one may rely on the kashrut of anyone else, including a person one does not know. Says the Shach exactly, Mashma daha lo samchinin alav davka biyadua shu chashud. That's only when, for sure, we know that he is suspect. About the Stam Yisrael, but a Jew who I do not know, a regular person, samchinin alav, Afilu bi'isur d'oraita. We rely on him even regarding a Torah prohibition. And I would just say, if I don't know the Jew, I have no evidence to tell me that he is not observant or she's not keeping kosher, I should rely on that. However, it seems that the Ramah is somewhat more stringent than the Shulchan Aruch concerning aspects of this issue. The Ramah writes that one may not purchase any food that could potentially be non-kosher, prepared by one about whom it is unknown whether they keep kosher. The Ramah adds, though, that if one ends up staying in such a person's house, he would be permitted to eat the food. And as he says here, the Yesh Omrim, אפילו ממי שאינו חשוד, רק שאין מכירים אותו, שהוא מוחזק בכשרות, אסור לקנות ממנו יין, או שאר דברים שיש לחוש לאיסור, מיהו אם נתארח אצלו, אוכל עמו. He says, some say that if it is forbidden to purchase wine or other items about which concern exists, that they may be prohibited, even from one who is not suspect, just that people do not know whether he is presumed to keep kosher. Nevertheless, if one ended up lodging with him, he may eat with him. From this comment of the Ramah, it appears that 2 points are being made. Number one, any foods about which concern exists that they could be made in a non-kosher manner are forbidden to be purchased from a person who does not have a chezkat kashrut, a specific presumption of keeping kosher. Other foods that are definitely kosher, though, would be allowed to be purchased. Number two, if one stays with such a person who is not known to be specifically have a chezkat kashrut, is permitted to eat food that is definitely kosher. The previous discussion concerning the opinion of the Ramah revolves around one about whom it is unknown whether they keep kosher or not. What then is the halakha concerning one about whom it is known that they for sure do not keep kosher, or is suspected that this is the case? May one eat permitted foods from this person? From the original quote of the Shulchan Aruch, it seems that kosher foods would be permitted to eat. But the Taz quotes the Ramah in the Darkei Moshe as saying that one should not even eat those foods that are definitely permitted if they are served by such a person. As it says, the Taz here, V'katav b'darkei Moshe, b'shem Hagat Ashirei, shemi shechashut al isur, someone who is suspect for being having food which is forbidden, asur le'echol imo, it's forbidden to eat with him. Afilu devarim mutarim, even permitted foods. Shema yochilenu devarim asurim gamken, lest he will also feed him items that are forbidden. So here, to summarize so far, the Shulchan Aruch, Sephardic Pesach, I can rely on someone I do not know that they are going to serve me kosher food no matter what. The Ramah says I shouldn't buy food from that person, but I can eat with them if I have no other choice. They both agree that, sorry, not they both agree. If the person, there is a question on them, says the Shulchan Aruch, you can eat the food which is totally permitted. But the Taz says that based on his understanding of the Ramah, even permitted kosher food would not be allowed because perhaps that person will feed you non-kosher as well. Although this ruling is subject to significant debate, Rav Vosner suggests an explanation based on the Rambam that harmonizes this ruling with the other rulings of the Ramah and Shulchan Aruch above. And he says as follows, and I'm going to read it in bold in the English. Ideally, one should not stay and eat with him at all, even when eating permitted items, due to concern that he might feed him forbidden foods about which he is suspect. And the second ruling is that if he went ahead and did lodge with him, he need not cancel his stay, but rather just eat what is definitely permitted. So therefore, lechatchila, don't put yourself in that situation. B'diavad, if you have no other choice and that's where you are, make sure they're giving you totally permitted food. And there you have that summary there. You can see it. The chashud, suspected of not eating kosher. One may not purchase food from him, and one may not eat any food at his home. That's the Rambam Shulchan Aruch. B, if one ended up staying at his house, one should eat only foods that are definitely permitted. That's the Rambam and the Shevet HaLevi. What about whom it is unknown if his level is kashrut? One may purchase food from him, that's the Shulchan Aruch. And B, one should not purchase food from him because it might not be kosher. That was the Rambam and the Ramah. One may still stay at his house and eat with him. That was the Rambam and the Ramah and the Shach. Binyamin Kohen writes in his Chelkak Binyamin that even one who appears to be observant and maintains a kosher home, that person is considered to have a cheskat kashrut, a presumption of credibility. This is the basis for the practice of staying and eating at the home of a family who one does not know, but it seems clear that they have the appearance of observant Jews and maintain a kosher home. And the intent, he says right here, presumption of being kosher. The intent is not that one must be greatly God-fearing or a pious or righteous person. Rather, anyone who conducts himself according to Jewish religion, who puts on talit and tefillin, and prays 3 times a day, washes his hands before eating bread, and conducts his home as being kasher, this one is presumed to be kosher. Okay, you might say that's a high bar, but he wants to tell you, do they have simanim? Do they have signs of religious observance? Not that they necessarily look a particular way or wear particular items of clothing, rather that they are, especially for a man, that they have these external simanim, external signs such as tefillah, such as wearing talit and tefillin, and obviously washing hands before eating bread. Now, what comes up very commonly is the discussion about eating at a home of non-observant relatives and friends. Can I trust them when they say everything is kasher? They'll offer disposables, they'll bring other types of things. Can I rely on that? Rav Moshe Feinstein addresses this. And he says that relatives may be believed despite the fact that they fit into this category of chashud, of being suspect, and one may eat the food served in the house even if one did not verify that every single type of food served is kosher. How does he come up with this? And we'll see this in the bold. He says, I suggested as a novelty that there is room to be lenient for many people. If the father knows for sure, and it's very interesting here, he's talking about in those days, children going off the derech, so it's, can the father eat in the children's homes? If the father knows and is sure of kimle begava, that his daughter or daughter-in-law would not cause him to violate a prohibition, because he knows their nature, and with definite knowledge by having tested her many times, he can look her in the eyes and he knows if she's fibbing or not. She knows if she's trying to pull a fast one. He can rely on her and eat what she cooks for him from meat. Anything that she says to him comes from kosher meat and is served in special utensils she designated for him. Okay, we can rely on that. And therefore he continues, therefore in situations of pressing need and for weak individuals, and I'll put myself in that category, one may be lenient if he knows with certainty that he is sure based on her nature and her habits with a number of tests that she will not cause him to sin in relying on her and eating what she cooks for him, and says it was done in a kosher manner, then one can rely on this. But he adds a caveat. However, for others, non-relatives, and not in cases of pressing need, and for those who are healthy, one must be stringent, okay? So what he's saying here is, if this is a close family member, could be a parent, could be a child, you can trust, and you really can trust them, then this is fine. But you can't use this leniency for, okay, now I can eat in anyone's home I want. Rav Moshe Sternbach suggests another possible direction for leniency, that even if the relative keeps non-kosher meat in the house, they can show the package on the meat to verify that it is indeed kosher. He then brings Rav Moshe's suggestion as well and states the one who wishes to may rely on it, but concludes that it still requires further analysis. Okay? So if they bring you the food, they show you the pots and pans that they're going to use, then one can rely on that one. You can see that one inside on your own. Okay? Rav Eliezer Melamed notes that if the food has been verified to be kosher and the dishes have been kashered properly or disposable dishes have been used, one may heat the food up in the oven by covering it properly. Okay, and this is something which one can rely on even if they're not a relative. If you know what's being made in front of you and you can see it's being double wrapped, etc., etc., there's no reason to be concerned about this. And it says here, if the host orders prepared food from a kosher restaurant, one may heat up the food in his oven, provided the food is placed in a disposable pan, wrapped with aluminum foil, in order to prevent steam from the oven from entering into the foods. If one is heating up the foods in the microwave, one should place them in a meat utensil, like a disposable plastic utensil, wrap the food with the utensil in a bag in order to prevent steam from the microwave entering the food. So again, he's giving us a situation of how we can create a permissible way of doing it. Another suggestion could be to fabricate some excuse as to why one does not wish to eat the questionable foods, which obviously won't work if you're going for a long time. According to the Sdei Chemed, it is permitted to lie in order to prevent revealing one's true halachic concerns for not eating if one is too uncomfortable to explain the problem. And again, this is a nice piece of advice. You don't really want to be caught out on this because it could definitely cause some very hurt feelings, especially if the family members are going out of their way to try to help. And he adds here, and he may lie by saying that the reason he is refraining is not out of concern for her prohibition, but for another reason, which is included in the permission to lie, which is because of darkei shalom, of maintaining the peace. And he concludes, it is permitted to change the truth for the sake of peace. And it is obvious that the peace of his soul is more loved and beloved than the peace of his body, which is better to not cause a ruckus than it is to make sure he gets a nice full dinner. The Sefer HaKashrut mentions a similar position as well, and he says, when staying at such a home, it is permitted to alter the truth due to darkei shalom, and to explain, even using an explanation that is not completely true, they're refraining from partaking in the food. It's very interesting. One time, the Rabisa and I had terrible food poisoning, and we were staying at a lovely observant family for Shabbat, and we didn't eat anything because every time we ate anything, we ended up running to the bathroom, and so they actually thought that we were choshed, that we were concerned about their food, and we were too embarrassed to tell them that we had.
We were so sick.
It was terrible. It was really, I've never had food poisoning like it. When people tell you about bad food poisoning, that was, it was before we had kids, but it was, or maybe Kochava was a baby, but it was crazy. I can still remember it because the family thought that there was something going on. We kept on running to our rooms every 5 minutes, and we didn't want to tell them that the food was giving us, it was bad, very bad. Hold on, we'll bring back the page. That was a bad story. Okay, so eating at the home of kashrut observant individuals who have different practices. So this is I told you that the types of questions I get. Number one, can I trust so-and-so who I think is kosher? The answer is yes, unless you have reason to believe otherwise. Number two, what can I do about going to close relatives who don't keep kosher? If you really can trust them and you know they're not going to lie to you and they're going to fulfill everything that you say, you can trust that the food is kasher. If you are still uncomfortable, best to say you've got a stomachache, unless you're going for a week. Now, the third comment comes up a lot, which is, can I eat in someone's home who keeps different practices? For example, can an Ashkenazi person go to a Sephardic home on Pesach? Can a Sephardi eat Ashkenazic food where they're not careful about things which Sephardim are much more stricter on? So I'll begin with a Mishnah, a statement in Masechet Yevamot. And there the Gemara says, Afal pi she'elu osrim ve'elu matirin, even though Beit Hillel would prohibit certain things, Afal pi, I'm going to say again. Although Beit Hillel prohibit the rival wives to the brothers and Beit Shammai permit them, and although these disqualify these women and those deem them fit, so basically what we're trying to understand here is, even though Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai make very different rulings, and they permit those which Beit Hillel permits, Beit Shammai prohibits, and that which Beit Shammai permits, Beit Hillel prohibits, and vice versa, all that, says the Gemara, Lo nimneu Beit Shammai melisa nashim mi Beit Hillel v'lo Beit Hillel mi Beit Shammai. Nevertheless, Beit Hillel still allowed their women to marry men from Beit Hillel, and Beit Hillel allowed their daughters to marry men from Beit Shammai. In addition, the Gemara in Chulin notes that despite the numerous disagreements between Rav and Shmuel, Rav insisted that Shmuel would never feed him anything that Rav would held was forbidden to eat. As the Gemara says here, Rabbi Elazar have a kaim kame de Mar Shmuel. Rabbi Elazar was standing before Mar Shmuel. Aitu lekame dagim sha'alu b'kara. And they brought before Shmuel a fish that had been removed directly from the fire and placed into a bowl. V'ka'achel b'kutach. And he ate it with this dairy dish. Kutach is, I've told you this before, it's moldy bread or stale bread and sour milk. It's in a Babylonian delicacy, but don't ask me why. But the important thing here is it's chalavi. Yahivle velo achil. They brought it to him, and sorry, so I'm losing my train of thought. So I get so carried away with understanding the scenario. So they place it into a bowl, and he ate it with the kutach. Shmuel gave Rabbi Eliezer some of the dish, but Rabbi Elazar did not eat it. Why? Because he was a student of Rav, who prohibited such mixtures. Okay, this is a whole discussion about nat bar nat, and you can look at footnote number 10 there, exactly what's happening. But Shmuel said to him, to your teacher Rav, I gave this dish, and he ate from it, yet you won't eat from it? Later, Rabbi Elazar came before Rav and said to him, did the master retract this halacha? Do you permit this? Rav said to him, God forbid that the progeny of Abba bar Abba, that's another name for Shmuel, would feed me something that I do not hold to be permitted. And therefore, what do I think? Shmuel never fed me such a dish. And we're going along again, back to our assumptions. And my assumption is, unless I can prove it 100%, I trust with perfect faith that the person is going to give me permitted food, not permitted food for them, permitted food for me, i.e., Shmuel would never serve Rav something that Rav could not eat. And therefore, what could I say? Me, as a Sephardic rabbi, would not serve my Ashkenazic mother-in-law something that she would not be comfortable eating. Okay, it's a very important yesod. The Ramah rules that the statement of Rav is also practical halacha as well. And he says, Misha noheg be'eze davar isur mikoach shesover shedinahu hachi, or mikoach chumra shehechmiya al atzmo, mutar le'echol im acherim shenohagin bo heter, Devadai lo yachiluhu davar shu noheg bo isur. One who treats a certain item as forbidden because he feels that this is the halakha, or due to a stringency that he is stringent upon himself, is permitted to eat which others who treat it as permitted, as the others would never, ever, ever feed him something that he treats as forbidden. Rav Yosef Tzvi Rimon, a contemporary rabbi in Alon Shavut, concludes from here that a host should try to go out of his way to make the guest comfortable by serving food that is halakhically acceptable to him as well. And he says here, Adam ha'ochel kashrut regila u'marech mishu makpid al mahadrin, ברור שהמארח צריך להתאמץ להעלות את רמת הכשרות בזמן הארוחה, כך שהאורח יאכל את הרמה שעליה הוא מקפיד. If a person who regularly eats food that has standard kashrut certification, and he hosts a guest who only eats mahadrin, the host must certainly try to raise the level of kashrut observance in his home while the person is staying there, so that the guest can eat his desired level of kashrut. Not complying with the guest's stricter kashrut standards would be like inviting a vegetarian for a meal. I love this line. And giving him meat. A host must ensure that his guest will be comfortable with the food that he serves with respect to both its taste and its kashrut. Thus, there are times that he must raise his own standards of kashrut so they satisfy everybody. Rav Melamed offers a similar suggestion, and he indicates that in his opinion, only very specific widespread customs should be adhered to when eating at other people's houses, such as glat meat for Sephardim, we remember we're careful about that, and kitniyah on Pesach for Ashkenazim, that we should be careful with that. And he's saying no one worth their salt, no Sephardi is going to serve, who does eat kitniyot, is going to serve those to Ashkenazim. And you can see that one if you have time. The Rama adds, V'chein ha-minhag b'chol makom. And this is the custom everywhere, that a specific type of fat on the animal is forbidden. It's called, except for the residents of reigns, who treat part of it as permitted, and one should not protest against them, since an elder already ruled for them that it is permitted. And in any place where they treat it as forbidden, it is considered like other forbidden fats, which is nullified in bittul bashishim. But the utensils of the residents of reigns are not forbidden, since they treat it as permitted. And therefore, provided that they don't serve you that food, there should be no concern for what's going on. So, based on what we've seen so far, yes, I can trust the average person that they keep kosher. 2, there are circumstances that I can eat in my secular family's home. And 3, yes, I can eat at a Ashkenazi home if I'm Sephardic, if I'm concerned that maybe they're less lenient, they're more lenient on some things, they're not going to provide that for me, and vice versa. So the question comes up, why do we need kashrut status? Why do we need mashgichim? If someone keeps a kosher home, why do they need checks for running a business? And here, the important thing to understand is, if they're making money on something, then the concern is that they are going to be less careful about some of the rules. And Rav Melamed explains it here. And we'll see this in English. The basic credibility that every Jew has relates to standard situations, like a person who stays with his friends, where he may assume that the host serves him kosher foods. But when we're dealing with businesses, supervision is needed for them due to the financial enticements that could cause them to stumble. As the Torah warns merchants in a very unique manner about measurements, that they should be precise, they should not use them to cheat. Likewise, concerning those who sell food, since they may potentially profit from selling non-kosher food, supervision is required. In recent generations, food production has become complex, which caused the custom to become set that one may not purchase food about which questions could arise with regards to its kashrut from a factory or store that does not have kashrut certification, even if the seller is observant. And you can have a look at all those sources. But there is no exact definition as to the level of supervision necessary. Rather, there are 4 fundamental principles that guide the level of supervision. Number 1, the greater the enticement, i.e., the more the seller stands to profit, the more careful the supervision must be. Number 2, the more severe the level of prohibition under discussion, the more careful the supervision must be. Therefore, the tightest supervisions take place for meat, where stumbling involves Torah prohibitions and the enticement to cheat is very great, since non-kosher meat is half the price of kosher meat. The more people to which the seller provides food to, the greater the supervision must be to prevent mishaps for large numbers of people. And number 4, the more complex the food is, such as industrial production, where tens and hundreds of ingredients and additives may be used, so too the supervision must be more professional in order to address all potential issues that may arise. Now, I can tell you from history of countries of why Mashgiachim are necessary, that there are stories of butchers in early American life who they were God-fearing, but because it came to making a profit, began selling non-kosher meat to make money. And that is basically the bottom line, which is so-and-so might be the most wonderful human being around, but when it comes to making money, all bets are off and everyone needs checks and balances. And that is true, especially today when there's so much money involved, and it doesn't mean there's chas v'shalom any question about them. Everyone needs a mashgiach to double check things. If you're going to be in business, if it's just making food for each other and it's not a business, then no mashgiach is required. But that is why we say no matter what, you need a mashgiach. Okay, if you're going to be selling food. If you're just making food for friends, then again, we go back to that position, which is that unless proven otherwise, every person is permitted. Now, another famous question came up, which Rav Moshe Feinstein dealt with, which is, can a woman be a mashgiach? And I think it's a funny question now, because so many women are mashgichot, but this wasn't such a straightforward question when Rav Moshe Feinstein was addressed to him. Okay, he explains in source 32, concerning the rule of credibility, a woman is believed concerning prohibitions, as we've learned already, Eid echad ne'eman besurin. And so concerning hashgacha kashrut, it is in her power to not allow eating forbidden foods. Nevertheless, it is not a case of itchazek isura, since they only deal with kosher foods. Since most of the foods they buy are certainly kosher foods due to their fear that they will be discovered, and the concern is that perhaps they also buy forbidden foods, concerning which it is certainly not an established prohibition, we can consequently believe her, even if it is considered not biyada, even if it's something which she doesn't know completely, it's not in her hand literally, we can still rely on it to say that even if she's coming in and out, that we can rely on her to say that something is kosher or not. Rav Moshe explains that the food she is supervising are not assumed to be itchazek isura, to be established to be prohibited. Why? Because the company is supposed to sell only kosher. Therefore, even if it's argued that it's not in her power to force them to comply with the rules of the hashgacha, she would still be believed. Now, what's the issue here? They're saying in the 1940s, in the 1950s, a woman who would say, I'm sorry, mate, that's not kosher, what would happen? The man would strong-arm her and push her away and say, no, I'm doing it anyway. And Rav Moshe is saying, no, the woman can still be believed to, we can still trust her to be mashgiach. It's almost like back then, the mashgiach wasn't just checking and he or she will call the rabbi if there's a problem. He or she needed to be the strong arm. There wasn't time to call the rabbi. They would have to they'd forcibly have to push their way through. And they're saying, even in that situation, a woman is believed. And then it goes into here some basic guidelines concerning hashgachot, which you can read on your own. Entering a non-kosher restaurant, and what are the issues there of being in a non-kosher restaurant? It says as follows, the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat. Someone whose garments fell into water while walking on the road may replace them and continue to walk wearing them and need not be concerned about violating the prohibition against wringing or laundering. And we're talking about here that he was, this is obviously happening on Shabbat. When he reaches the outer courtyard of a place where he can leave his clothes, he spreads them out in the sun to dry, but not opposite the masses. Why? As they will suspect him of doing laundry on Shabbat. Here we have the concern of what's known as marit ayin. Someone will see something and they will assume the worst. Why? Why do we have to say that? Why can't we say that someone should assume the best in someone? Another example of marit ayin is found in Yoreh De'ah. It is forbidden to cook. Asur levashel b'chalev isha. It's very, I hope no one's having dinner now. It's forbidden to use breast milk. B'pnei marit ayin, because of marit ayin. Why? Ve'im nafal letoch hatavshil batel. But if this breast milk fell into the food, ein tzarich shiur. One does not need 60 to nullify it. Obviously not, because we know that breast milk is parva. But since it's parv, why is it an issue? Because someone will think that it's cow milk. So what do we do today when we have so many situations where someone might be in a restaurant and it's non-kosher? Do we assume they're eating non-kosher food? What about someone's eating meat with coconut milk? Do we assume that they're eating cow milk? When are we allowed to establish it? So the Rav Moshe, again, Rav Moshe writes here, concerning whether it is permitted to eat in a restaurant where only dairy food is prepared, but it belongs to Jews that desecrate Shabbat, there also could be some forbidden foods there. He says, therefore, to enter even just to eat foods that are known not to have any concern of prohibition, one should forbid because of marit ayin and suspicion. But if one is exceptionally hungry and is in a lot of pain and there's no other place nearby to eat, one may enter to eat foods that are known to be permitted. So again, marit ayin, like that story in the Gemara, I can wear the wet clothes and then leave them out to dry in a private manner so people don't see. But I'm not going to cause that pain of walking around with no clothes on, which would cause terrible embarrassment. So too here, I would permit the person, because of great hunger, to have something to eat, but otherwise it would be problematic to be there. Rav Melamed also permits entering a non-kosher restaurant in America, in the diaspora where necessary, though he does not mention the same conditions given by Rav Moshe, and he says it there. One should refrain from entering a non-kosher restaurant due to Chilul Hashem and marit ayin, and certainly not to sit with a friend who is eating non-kosher food there. But in the diaspora, when meetings with non-Jews, one may be lenient, but in Israel, where the majority of restaurants are kosher, one should not enter a non-kosher restaurant, even with a Gentile. Okay, now, oh, he didn't carry on. I thought I was going to go into a little bit more about eating the, what's it called, eating non-dairy milks, for example, coconut milk, almond milk, and all those things. So now, because they're so ubiquitous, because they're so common, also there's no concern that if I'm eating them, that someone would think I was eating meat and cow milk. They would know that it's a non-dairy substitute. So when something is established and everyone knows about it, then the rule of marit ayin does not apply. Okay, I think we've now covered all the possible questions you might want to ask. Can I trust someone that they keep kosher? Absolutely, unless you know otherwise. Number two, are there ways where you can eat in someone's home who's a close relative who doesn't normally keep kosher? Yes, but good to check exactly how. Number three, can I eat in someone's home who keeps different standards? Absolutely. Number four, if that's all true, why is it that if someone who keeps kasher, why do they need a mashgiach? Because it's business, and business changes everything. And number five, what about maritime? Can I go into a non-kosher restaurant? Can I go? Ideally, no. Only if it was an extremely pressing situation. But for business deals would be fine, but certainly not to go to be with friends who are going to eat non-kosher, who are less observant. That you'd want to try and avoid. And number six, the issue of maritime, of eating non-dairy substitutes is no longer an issue since they're so common. Are there any other questions? Yes, and obviously, if there was someone just put in the chat to me, if it was a meat substitute, for example, Impossible Burger, Beyond Burgers, those could be eaten with cheese. For example, when you go to Island Crust, you can get an Impossible Burger with a slice of cheese, no problem whatsoever. Any other questions, friends? All right. I'll take it offline. If you have other questions, have a great evening.